All right, let's dive into one of the biggest questions humanity has ever asked. Where did gods come from? Seriously. Today we're going to unpack Max Mueller's wild and brilliant theory of naturalism. It suggests that the answer isn't some grand divine mystery, but actually a simple and fascinating misunderstanding of language itself.
I mean, have you ever really thought about it? Why did our ancestors look up at a thunderstorm and not just see lightning, but see an angry god? Or watch a sunrise and picture a beautiful goddess? It's kind of strange, right? These myths feel so epic, so timeless, but they had to start somewhere. How exactly does a big ball of gas in the sky become a powerful god with a name, a personality, and a whole bunch of drama?
Well, one 19th century scholar had a pretty compelling answer. His theory was called Naturism, and it was one of the first big attempts to explain the origin of religion scientifically.
So what is Naturism? At its heart, it's actually super simple. The theory says that the first religions didn't start with ghosts or ancestor worship or anything like that. Nope. It all began with the sheer awe people felt for the forces of nature they saw every single day. You know, the power of the sun, the mystery of the moon, the ferocity of a storm. That feeling of awe, Mueller believed, eventually became worship.
And the guy behind all this was Friedrich Max Mueller. Now, Mueller was an absolute genius when it came to language. He was a philologist, which is a fancy way of saying he was like a word detective. He could trace words back through time to their earliest roots. And he was convinced that if you could just follow the clues hidden in ancient words, you could figure out exactly how the gods were born.
Okay, so how does language actually create gods? This is where Mueller's theory goes from interesting to absolutely mind-blowing. He claims that mythology wasn't something people just made up. It was basically an accident, a side effect of language evolving. And he gave it this incredible name, a disease of language.
Here's the key idea. Mueller said that our ancient ancestors didn't talk about nature like we do, in these cold, scientific terms. Their language was full of life. It was poetic. They didn't just say, the sun rises. They'd say something more like, the sun chases away the night, or the sun climbs the sky. They described nature as if it were alive, as if it had intentions.
And this is the perfect example of how it works. Imagine someone thousands of years ago saying something beautiful and poetic like, the sun follows the dawn. Makes sense, right? It's just a description of a sunrise. But fast forward a few hundred years, Mueller says people forgot the original simple meaning. The ancient words they used for sun and dawn started to sound less like objects and more like names, say Apollo and Daphne. And that simple word, follows, well, that turned into the much more dramatic chases. And boom, just like that, a simple observation becomes an epic myth about the sun god Apollo chasing the poor nymph Daphne.
So you can really break it down into 4 simple steps. Step 1, you see something in nature, like a sunrise. Step 2, you describe it poetically. You personify it. You say something like, the dawn springs from the sky. Step 3, and this is the most important part, forgetting. Generations pass and people completely forget that this was just a metaphor. And finally, step 4, mythology. That poetic phrase is now taken literally. The words themselves become gods, and whole stories are built around them.
And that's exactly what he meant by that famous quote. When he called mythology a disease of language, he wasn't being negative. He meant it was like a natural but unplanned consequence of how language grows and changes. It's this process where simple nouns, the noumena, as they were called in Latin, got twisted over time and became divine beings, the noumena. It's a crazy transformation.
Okay, let's get into the really cool stuff. We're going to look at some amazing examples from Mueller's own work, where he plays word detective and connects ancient words to some of the biggest names in mythology. So check this out. By digging through ancient languages, Mueller found these incredible connections. He saw that the Sanskrit word for bright sky was dios. Sound familiar? It should. It became the Greek god Zeus. And get this, the Sanskrit word for dawn was ahana. And who did that become? The Greek goddess Athena, or Athene. It's wild. The names of these powerful gods were, quite literally, just the old words for the sky and the dawn.
And this is the big aha moment of the whole theory. Think about that totally bizarre myth of Athena being born from Zeus's head. It sounds nuts, right? But through this lens, it suddenly makes perfect sense. It was never meant to be literal. It was just a beautiful poetic way of saying, the dawn comes from the sky. Athena is the dawn, Zeus is the sky. A simple, observable fact of nature got twisted into this incredible mythological story.
And you see this pattern everywhere once you start looking for it. The sun? Of course, it's worshipped as a life giver, like Apollo or Surya.
Rivers, they bring life to the land, so they become goddesses of fertility. The sky? It's huge, it's above everything, so it becomes the all-powerful Father God. And storms? Well, it's pretty easy to see how a terrifying thunderstorm could be seen as a powerful, angry deity.
So, Mueller's theory was totally groundbreaking. But what's the final verdict? I mean, how does it actually hold up today? Okay, so let's do a super quick recap of the main points. Religion starts with awe for nature. Personification is the key. Myths are basically a big misunderstanding of language, and stories about the sun and the dawn are super, super important. It's a really neat package, but it wasn't long before people started finding some pretty big holes in it.
Yeah, the theory got a lot of pushback. For one thing, a lot of scholars were like, hang on, is it really that simple? Can one single idea really explain all the world's religions? It also kind of ignores other huge parts of the human experience that might lead to belief, you know? What about dreams, or dealing with death, or ancestor worship? And his focus on solar myths, well, it started to feel like he was trying to make every myth about the sun, which just isn't the case. And for these reasons, today, most anthropologists consider the theory pretty outmoded.
So, what are the big takeaways here? What do you really need to remember? First, naturism, the idea that religion started with worshiping nature. Second, the disease of language, this brilliant concept that myths are just poetic descriptions of nature that got taken literally. And finally, its legacy. Look, it's not the answer to everything, and it's definitely outdated, but it was a hugely important first attempt to explain mythology scientifically. It really got the ball rolling.
And that brings us to a final, really big question for you to think about. If Mueller's theory isn't the whole story, if myths aren't just a disease of language, then what are they? What deep-seated human needs do these incredible stories actually meet? Is it about explaining the world, building communities, coping with our fears? That's the stuff scholars are still debating today, and it's a fascinating rabbit hole to go down.